Hey guys, just a quick update here. So my RS3 was due for its scheduled maintenance, and so Audi of Stevens Creek provided me a 2018 Q5 as a loaner. So I thought that it would be an interesting video to put up comparing the Q5 and our A4 Allroad in terms of the cargo capability, the cargo area in general, because that fundamentally is the biggest difference, so to speak, between the two vehicles. The rest of it is quite similar, the drivetrain is quite similar, etc. etc. But this is something that I really wanted to cover because a lot of folks have the misconception that because the SUV or a crossover is physically larger, that the cargo area that it affords is typically also on the larger side. That is typically not the case, at least not for the reasons that most people think. So let me go over all of this in this video. I will have another video, by the way, that talks through the first scheduled maintenance that I have in place for the RS3. It'll be a fairly short video, but I did have a couple of issues with the car, and I didn't get the exact response that I wanted from Audi of Stevens Creek. But as I mentioned, that's another video. So the one thing that I will talk about before I go over the specifics of the cargo area is in general my experience driving the Q5. This is not my first time driving the new generation of the Q5. I've driven one before as well. Again, both times not for an extended period of time, but nevertheless, I have driven these vehicles. They are really, really good vehicles. There's a reason why, at least here in the Bay Area, you tend to see a crap ton of these vehicles on the road. Hugely popular for very understandable reasons. I myself personally am not a big fan of the current generation Q5 and its styling, especially the interior. I get the feeling that it's just entirely possible because of the height of the vehicle, the expansiveness of the vehicle. They had to reconfigure some of the interior elements. But then if you look at this area in general, the top, the front of the dash and the air conditioning vents, everything looks a little bit too plasticky. Right, whereas on the Allroad, which I'll show you in a little bit, I feel like all of these elements have been better integrated into the dash, so to speak. Likewise, because of the breadth of the area in between the transmission tunnel, the Mmi setup, the interface is a little different. Once again, I prefer the one on the A4 and the Allroad in general, because over there the actual Mmi joystick, so to speak, has the touch interface element right on top of it, versus it being a separate pad, which honestly I feel is a wasted space over here. But the rest of it, for the most part, is essentially very, very similar to the Allroad. And even in terms of the overall interface while driving, it feels very natural. The one thing that I will mention is that, again, as I feel, this is just probably me, myself, but I just feel like in general, the plastics, and I don't know if you can hear the creaking, the plastics used in the Q5 don't feel as higher quality as the ones in the Allroad. So for example, again, so this over here is soft touch plastic, as you can see very clearly. But curiously, and this is very, very strange, in something as expensive and as premium as the Q5, the materials on some fairly obvious touch points, such as near the headlight and the light controls, are all hard plastic. This to me came as a big surprise. I was not expecting this at all. Not in an Audi, definitely. But nevertheless, again, as I mentioned, I personally feel that the interior of the A4 Allroad comes together a little bit better. Again, as I mentioned, here is the comparison of the Allroad's interior. As I mentioned, the HVAC controls, the vents, etc., they just look a little bit better put together, a little bit better integrated. And again, as I mentioned, just given the fact that there isn't as much area to cover in the interior, I feel like all the controls seem logical. They don't seem designed just to take up space. A lot of which that is available in the Q5 in the interior. And likewise, again, as I mentioned, if you look at the door elements, etc., etc., even though they are all supposed to be soft touch plastic like the one in the Q5, this somehow just feels a little bit more solid. You can't hear any creaking, and I don't know if you can see it in the video, I'm actually applying a lot of force. So as I mentioned, the Q5 interior is not bad by any stretch of imagination. It just feels maybe a notch, like a tad notch lower than the A4. And one reason could be that obviously Q5 is a much higher volume vehicle for Audi, whereas the A4 Allroad is obviously a much lower vehicle, volume vehicle. And I think this one is still made in Germany. In fact, I know it's made in Germany, in the Ingolstadt factory, whereas the Q5 is made in Puebla. Again, nothing against the actual factory itself. It's just the economies of scale. So the Q5 is decidedly a much higher volume vehicle for Audi. So they just want to make sure that the components that they have in place are easier to manufacture in high volume. That's just my take on it. I could be entirely wrong. Alright, now coming back to the theme of the video. So as I mentioned, one big misconception, so to speak, that folks have in general about SUVs or crossovers is the fact that because dimensionally they look larger from the exterior, that all of that translates into larger interior spaces as well. Let's have a look at the interior dimensions of the Q5, especially the cargo area. I've already measured out the height, the width and the breadth of the cargo area, and I'll probably overlay it. But my point is that one key thing to keep in mind, especially when trying to maximize the use of the cargo area, is the well, let's call it depth, right? That is the dimension from the bumper all the way to the back of the seats. If you look at most of the spec sheets for vehicles, the manufacturers tend to quote the cargo volume. Now, this is hugely misleading because the reason why SUVs or crossovers tend to have larger volume for the cargo area is because they have a greater height. Now, if you want to make maximum use of your cargo space, you'll realize that it is the width and the depth that matter the most, not the height. Whether it is having dogs back there or whether it's trying to fit as many items as possible, seldom will you actually stack them to the height where you completely utilize the available height from the roof to the base of the cargo area. Whereas the probability of you trying to fit more things lengthwise or widthwise is fairly higher. You know, a typical IKEA trip would actually make much more use of the XY dimensions of the cargo space than the Z dimensions. And as you can see, based on the overlay, the Q5 falls short by default on the critical length dimension. And another key thing to keep in mind, by the way, especially if you have dogs, is the load floor is actually quite a ways higher from the ground. If you have shorter dogs, this may actually make it almost impossible for them to jump in. And if you have larger dogs, keep in mind that as they get older, it actually may become more difficult for them to jump in as well. In fact, as a demonstration, I have my young, 4-year-old golden here. Kale, come here, home. Good job. So she made short work of it because she's just a 4-year-old. But we also have a 6-year-old, and the first time when I asked him to jump into the back of the Q5, he hesitated quite a bit. Whereas when I asked him to jump into the back of the Allroad, he would do it without any issues, right? Kale, outside. Come here. Good girl. Home. So obviously that was just to show off my cute little dog more than anything else. But again, the point that I mentioned stands in that dimensionally, the cargo area in a wagon, even if it's a slightly lifted wagon like the Allroad, is definitely much more usable on a day-to-day basis than what a typical SUV or a crossover leads you to believe, right? Kale, off. Good job. So once again, I will overlay the dimensions in the cargo area for the Allroad that I've already measured, but you'll see that critically the depth once again is where the Allroad does really well. It doesn't do as well in the height metric, but again, as I mentioned, that's not a metric that you really make use of. It's the depth and much more importantly, the height of the load floor from the base. So please keep this in mind when you decide to choose an SUV or a crossover over a wagon. I know a lot of people say that one reason why they tend to choose an SUV, especially for their significant others, is the height factor. Now, that is partially true, especially if you have elderly parents and whatnot. It is easier to get in and out of a taller SUV than it is a slightly shorter wagon. But my wife, who primarily drives the Allroad over here, she's about 5'5" ish, right? So not short but not terribly tall either, and she's able to drive the Allroad perfectly fine. In fact, she prefers the something like an Allroad because she feels that something as tall as a Q5 or a Q7 disconnects her from the road. It makes her feel like she's actually on top versus part of the traffic, right? So again, it's personal preference, but at least when it comes to cargo space, don't let the spec sheet, the volume, cargo volume mentioned in the spec sheet fool you. That is not entirely, it doesn't convey the entire truth. And in most cases, obviously not in all cases, especially when the back of the wagon is super swoopy, like in some of the newer Volvos, but in most cases, the useful cargo area in a wagon tends to be more useful than the available or useful cargo area in an SUV. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you have any other questions. I wish I could have kept this vehicle for a little bit longer, so that I could have done a more comprehensive test drive, or a more comprehensive test of the vehicle. But yeah, I need to return this like fairly quickly. The one other thing, by the way, I will mention though is that this Q5 is fairly well equipped. The only thing that it doesn't have is the adaptive dampers, and boy, does that make a difference. So in case you don't know, in North America, all the A4 Allroads by default come with the adaptive dampers, wherein when you choose between comfort, auto and dynamic, in addition to the throttle response and the steering and whatnot, the suspension stiffness, the damping also changes significantly. Go look at my Allroad review where I actually wax poetic about this. It makes a huge difference, especially in comfort mode. The ride is super plush. It's amazing. Whereas on the Q5, even on a prestige trim, the adaptive dampers are completely optional. This vehicle does not have the adaptive dampers. So by default, the ride is very, very compliant, not bad at all. But I promise you, when you drive this car in comfort mode without the adaptive dampers and the Allroad in comfort mode with adaptive dampers, it'll make up for any difference in the height, the perceived difference in height. The ride quality on this is just simply on another level in comfort mode. So definitely keep that in mind as well. Again, as I mentioned, any other questions, comments, let me know in the comment section, and I hope to come back to you guys with more videos. Thanks a bunch. Hey guys, quick little addition. So I got a little lucky, or I guess maybe unlucky, depending on how you see it, where I had to take my RS3 back to the dealership because of a couple of unresolved issues. Again, you'll have that covered in another video separately. And I got another Q5 as a loaner for another day. So I actually thought I'd spend a little bit more time to talk about some of the cargo area differences. This will be a quick sort of like addendum to the main video. So one of the most obvious, which came as a bit of a surprise to me, was the fact that the privacy cover over here in the cargo area is completely manual. So you have to manually close it over here and manually pull it back. Whereas if you look at the Allroad, there's actually a little groove that runs the height of the boot area, and there's a little cable inside. So when the trunk lid actually opens and closes, the privacy cover, the cargo privacy cover, also opens and closes. So that's a nifty little feature that's missing on the Q5. I'm not sure if that's present in the Prestige. This is a loaded Premium Plus, but I somehow doubt it, because this entire area would have to actually be built of different components. But nevertheless, something to keep in mind over there. Similar to the Allroad, it also has a remote release, but again, as is the case with most Audis, for some strange reason, unlike the Mercedes-Benzes, it's not powered, so it doesn't actually flatten all the way down. You need to pull the release here and then walk on over and manually actually fold the seat flat after putting the headrest in. Again, kind of clunky, especially for what is supposed to be a luxury vehicle, but it is what it is, I guess. The other difference that you'll notice and see is the fact that you can actually individually move the 60/40 partition forward and backward, the rear seats. This is something now you cannot do with the Allroad. I think I've mentioned it in the main video, but to recap it over here, and it's actually a good, I would say, like 2 inches or so. Now the problem of doing this is that obviously, as you can see, there is very limited rear leg room. Most adults will not be able to sit, and if you look at the front seats, they are actually not back all the way on their tracks. If that happens, definitely most kids won't be able to sit there. But the other issue is the fact that if you notice here, for some strange reason, Audi doesn't have a flap of some sort to kind of cover this gap in between where the cargo area ends and where the seat back begins. And as a result, you can't really make much use of the storage area. If you have dogs and stuff, you need to be careful they don't get stuck here. If you have smaller things, you need to be careful they doesn't get lost over here. It's just not the best executed, idea, and I don't know why they would do that. Let me see what else is different or new over here. A lot of the other sort of little doodads to keep your groceries in place and the grocery net areas look very similar. Again, similar to the Allroad. There's a little 12-volt outlet over here. Let's see what's behind this. Okay, nothing particularly important. Oh, that little red cable that you see, that, if I'm not mistaken, is the emergency fuel hatch release. And I'm assuming, like in the other Audis, this would be the amplifier. Yep, it's the amplifier for the Bang & Olufsen system. This particular loaner actually happens to come with the optional cargo mat, the rubber cargo mat, which is pretty awesome. I mean, kudos to Audi to include that in the loaner. Oh, so lo and behold, like the Allroad, they have a nifty space saver tire, and I genuinely appreciate that Audi still includes these. Ideally, it should be a full-size spare, but a space saver is better than nothing. And what you see up top, the wire that connects into, is the subwoofer. So if you want to open the or remove the space saver tire, you need to remove the little center area first, which has the subwoofer in there, which is this piece right here, and you'll get the space saver. You'll have to use the inflator that's right up over there to inflate the space saver tire. So that's another difference, and I can't think of anything else. Oh, again, on the A4 and the Allroad, the release for the seat backs, rear seat backs, are typically up over here, whereas on the Q5 it's much more convenient. It's placed right here, and again, it's not powered, but then I think it's spring loaded, because of which when you pull the release, it falls back, which is pretty cool. The Allroad does not do that. And I think the one big last difference is the fact that so the way it moves back and forth is 60/40, but strictly speaking, you actually have this little center area which does this. Let me press this button here. There you go. So it folds flat in the middle, so it becomes a 40-20-40 split, so to speak. But the strange bit is that on the Q5, it's all or nothing, in that you either have this middle area folded as is 20, or you don't, as is, the way you can see it. On the Allroad, and actually the A4 and the A3 and even my RS3, if I open this armrest, so to speak, with the cup holders in them, typically over here you have another little latch, and if you open that, it acts as a ski hatch. So you don't actually have to put the entire middle part of the seat down. You can still use the armrest and whatnot, but then long thin items can actually be placed right through the little ski hatch all the way through to the back. You can't do that with the Q5. You either get the armrest, or you actually have to collapse it all the way in to get the pass-through. Well, it's not technically really a pass-through in that it's gotten flat right now, but that is something to keep in mind. I'm not so sure how many people here in the US actually end up using the ski pass-through in the center part of the rear seats. I guess most people end up just using the ski rack up on the roof, but a little less flexibility in terms of some of the cargo management features on the Q5. In addition to the fact that, again, as I mentioned, the boot area doesn't have as much length as the Allroad, which makes it, I don't know. I personally feel I like the wagon form factor, if you haven't already picked up on that, and I feel it's a little bit more versatile, but to each their own. So yeah, I just thought I'll post this little update since I have this car for a little longer. Let me know if you have any other questions or concerns, and I'll see you in the next video.